Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Export Skills Program session. And today, of course, we continue our Marketing Masterclass, and we have the first of our sessions on branding. Today, specifically looking at the marketing funnel. I'm Collins Rex, and I'm a director with the Global Trade Professionals Alliance. The GTPA, of course, is an organization that cultivates international standards, and our aim is to create a trade environment that is both inclusive and trusted by all. And the GTPA has partnered with Global Victoria to deliver this comprehensive export skills program. And the address you see on your screen will take you directly to the full program, where you can see details of all the sessions still to come. And of course, you can register for all of them as well. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, which for me is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who are joining us online today. I just draw your attention to the disclaimer on the screen. As always, remember that if you do choose to use any of the information presented today to inform business decisions, you need to make sure that they are relevant to you, and all information is of a general nature. And also, please remember that this webinar is being recorded. So as I mentioned, I'm Collins Rex. Most of you know me by now. For those of you who are joining us today for the first time, welcome. And I'm delighted to have the pleasure of your company today, particularly at this masterclass session, because marketing is something that is particularly close to my heart. So let's get right into today's session. As I mentioned at the start, today we're going to be looking at the marketing funnel, and the following session in the Marketing Masterclass next week's session, we're going to be drilling down specifically into branding and how that relates to the marketing funnel. As always, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on that as we move along. If a question is relevant to the discussion at the time, I'm more than happy to take it immediately. If not, we'll hold it to the end. And as always, if you don't think of your questions during the session, but you have them after the fact, I'll give you my email address at the end. So what are we covering off today? Well, we're going to look at what is the marketing funnel, the stages of the marketing funnel, and that's where the bulk of today's session sits, and then a B2B versus B2C marketing funnel comparison. We'll look at measuring success, because as we always emphasize, unless you can measure it, you really don't know if a campaign was working or not, or indeed whether the spend was worth it. And finally, I'm just going to touch on a couple of tools that can help you measure and also help to increase those conversions. And as always, questions at the end. So let's get straight into it. And what is the marketing funnel? Well, we'll start off with a little bit of history. In 1910, the American philosopher John Dewey introduced the 5 stages that consumers go through before, during, and after purchasing a good or service. And John Dewey's theory: need recognition, which is the first step. You can't buy something until you know you have a need for it, followed by information search, evaluations of alternatives, and finally purchase, and then the post-purchase behavior. And we'll be touching a little bit later on today on the extended marketing funnel, which includes that final phase of John Dewey's theory. So John Dewey's theory, as I said, posited in 1910, of course, has evolved into what we refer to as the marketing funnel today. And marketing funnel simply looks at the different stages from the moment a person first hears about a business or a product to the moment they make that final purchase. And in whether the case of an individual making a purchase or a company entering into a sales transaction. So why do we call it a funnel? Well, marketing efforts, of course, don't always immediately result in people buying. In fact, they probably very rarely buy right away. Initially, people come along, interest is generated, leads are captured, and as all of these strangers turn into leads, they're drawn into the mouth of the funnel. You're then continuing to market to those leads, and eventually some of those leads move through the narrowest part of the funnel and turn into customers. So the marketing funnel is a very effective way of looking at the way in which customers make buying decisions. It helps you to give a very clear view of the customer journey, and it also helps you to identify any roadblocks that might hinder the progress through the funnel. Now, once you actually analyze this data, you can make changes along the way to ensure that you eliminate any barriers and ultimately improve your conversion rate. And this might be by making your website more user-friendly, for example, particularly if you're selling through e-commerce. It could be through creating a social media campaign or a different advertising campaign that might involve advertising on radio or television or billboards, etc., and promoting through channels that are different from the ones you were promoting through if those were not working. So let's look in more detail now at those all-important stages of the marketing funnel. As you can see, there are 6 stages in the marketing funnel, starting at the very top where you have the broadest possible base, and then working your way narrower and narrower until eventually, right at the bottom, you have people that are making purchases. So the funnel starts with awareness, it works through interest, then consideration, intent, evaluation, and purchase. Now, there are many different marketing funnel models. This is the one that we are going to concentrate on for today, and it's also the one that is probably most commonly accepted. So starting off with awareness, this is the point where your customers first learn about your brand. And it's also where lead generation starts to take place. So how does this happen? Well, in order to build awareness, you need to develop targeted marketing campaigns that are very much geared towards people who may need or indeed want your product. Now, all of this, of course, needs to feed back into that all-important marketing strategy that by this point you have already formulated. And that means you also need market segmentation so that you create tailored campaigns for each different customer type. And if you cast your mind back to that creation of an avatar so that you have a sense of who your ideal customer is, this is where we start talking about marketing segmentation. At this point, it's also really useful to use lead capture forms. You can't capture a lead if you don't know who that lead is. So at the very least, you need to get information from the people that have come to you at this point. And something like an email, of course, is very important because if you've got an email address, you can then start communicating directly to that particular lead. This is one of the most important lead generation strategies because if you've got contact information, you can reach out to people directly. Without that, you're still using a scattergun approach because you cannot speak directly to any one lead. The next stage of the funnel is interest. So leads that have shown an interest in your business then move into the next phase of the funnel. So they go from the very top where they've just become aware of you to the next level down where not only are they aware of you, but they are interested in you and what it is you have to sell. At this point, lead generation turns into lead nurturing, because this is the point at which you as a brand start building a connection with the contacts that have moved through the awareness stage. Now, one of the most effective ways to build interest is through email marketing. And that, of course, a relatively new way for us to be communicating with those leads that we now wish to nurture, but it is a very effective one. And we've looked at some of the stats around this in the past, where for approximately every dollar spent, around $44 of sales can be generated. Through a direct campaign, you then start building relationships with your leads by reaching out to them directly with relevant branded content. Once your leads have moved through the interest phase, they then start considering what it is that they really want. And this is the consideration part of the funnel. So at this stage, consumers are evaluating the different ways that they can address their needs or their wants. So they now already know your offering and they're familiar with your brand because they've gone through awareness. They've also expressed an interest and you've given them more information to pique that interest even further. Now it's your job to make sure that they realize a product, a good, a service like yours presents the best solution to a problem they may be experiencing. That problem could be anything from, I really need a new pair of shoes, to I need somebody to do my books for me, and therefore I need an accountant. But the way that you do this is by using marketing automation. So you've already reached out to them in one form or another, probably by email. Now is the time to start solidifying that relationship by automating your marketing campaigns and targeting them with actionable intent. So this is the point at which, if you've got that automatic email system set up, you're going to send them a newsletter, for example, that is going to offer them a free trial or your sales announcement. You don't have to do this via email. You can also do it via content. And this is content, again, that you will be targeting directly at the leads that you've already generated. But this is where you're going to offer them seasonal specials, etc. Informational content such as blog posts, webinars, etc. are very effective because they speak directly to the people in your lead bucket. And they will then be more interested in what you have to do. They will be more considerate of what it is that you're offering because you are indirectly and more gently guiding them towards the product. The following phase of the marketing funnel is the intent phase. So prospective customers, now known as prospects, so they've moved from being leads to being warm leads to being prospects, and they move to the intent stage once they demonstrate some sort of intention to purchase a product. Now, this can have various forms. If you're selling via e-commerce, this is the point at which they add something into their shopping cart. They've put it in the cart, they haven't yet checked out. So they still only have an intent to purchase. They have not yet committed to the purchase. This is also the point at which they may contact customer service reps to ask a specific question. So they are intending to purchase something. They reach out to customer service to say, your website shows this product, but it doesn't show the color that I'm after. Does it come in a different color? Do you have stock? In the case of B2B customers, this is the point at which that business customer is going to reach out and say, how many of these units do you have in stock? I'm wanting to purchase 1,000 and your website doesn't show me how many units you have, or it shows out of stock. Can you tell me when it will be back in stock, etc. So intent doesn't mean that they're going to purchase immediately, but it does mean that they are primed for that all-important purchase. The intent stage is the time that you solidify in your customer's mind why your offering is the only option they need to be considering. So at this point, they're probably weighing up a number of different options. This is your opportunity to nudge them a little bit further and into your direction alone. Now, at this point, you're going to have to target them with marketing materials that make a very strong case for why your product is better than your competitors. And this is also the point at which you're going to have those more personal contacts through a phone call, through a very directly targeted email to say, you've put something in your cart, you haven't yet checked out. Can we help you make that purchasing decision? If you're not selling via e-commerce, it's a very similar thing where you're going to reach out to them and say, you've expressed an interest in this product by checking stock levels, for example. Can we tell you a little bit more about this product so that you will essentially make that final decision? So this is where you're going to tell them about some of the features of the product, the fact that it may not be in stock yet, but you have an alternative that does very similar duty, and you're prepared to give them a discount on that one. From interest, we then start moving, or rather from intent, we start moving into the evaluation phase. So this is the point at which lead nurturing, because up to this point, you've just kind of fostered their interest, you've cosseted them, you've given them all sorts of personal information, you've made them feel really special, you've given them as much information about the product and the service as you possibly can, all of it to sweeten the deal. Evaluation is where lead nurture meets sales. So at this point, the prospective customer is making the final decision about whether or not they are going to buy your product. This is also the point at which the marketing and the sales teams have to work together to convince prospective buyers to take the leap and make the purchase. Here, the focus is absolutely on positioning your offerings as the ideal choice for the customer. Now, when we talk about marketing and sales, we have to some extent already over the course of this series had a discussion about the difference between marketing and sales. And we're going to be drilling down that a lot more in future sessions, particularly when we get to the sales session, where we're actually going to start looking at some of those all-important sales techniques and how you go from marketing, where all the information has been presented to a customer, to sales, where the customer is actually converted from just being an interested observer to actioning and making a final sale decision. And evaluation is the point at which that starts to occur. Now, the final part of the sales funnel or the marketing funnel is that all-important purchase. Everything you've done in the funnel up to this point is pushing people further and further and further through until eventually they drop through into making a sale. The purchase is where prospects turn into customers, because this is where they make that final buying decision, whether it be a service or a product. Now, at this point, marketing steps aside, sales takes over to manage the transactions. So at this point, it's the sales team that is going to discuss the final price. It's the sales team that is going to sweeten the deal by throwing in some extras, etc., by offering discounts and the like for B2B customers. If you're selling online and you're selling B2C, the same process occurs, but it actually occurs in a far more subtle way, because there's very rarely a personal interaction with the salesperson. The system actually does this on behalf. And we've all been in that position where we've put something in our cart, we're about to check out, where there's a pop-up, for example, that says, you're about to purchase this garment. Here's another one that would supplement that and work really well with it. Now, at this point, of course, all those different sales techniques start coming into play. This is where you really get into the customer's head and you finally close the deal. Now, the purchase decision is different between individual customers, so B2C, and business customers B2B. Business customers are going to, in the first place, involve a whole lot of other people in this final purchasing decision. It's very rarely a decision made by one person, whereas consumers make that decision individually because they make it for themselves. Now, the marketing funnel that we've just discussed is one of the most recognizable one. There are others, and important as well to be aware of a couple of the others that are out there. The same basic process is in place, but some of them are more simple than others. They almost condense down all the various stages of the funnel, and this is one of those. So the simplified marketing funnel refers to 3 different stages. There's tofu, mofu, and bofu. And it does sound a bit like a menu in a Chinese restaurant. But essentially what it is top of the funnel, and it is middle and bottom. So the top of the funnel is where prospects become aware of your brand and start engaging with it for the first time. They might not know very much about you at all. So this is where all the content, all the marketing material, etc., comes into play that promotes brand awareness. And this is particularly important if you are selling online. The middle of the funnel is where customers have already engaged with your brand through awareness. Now they're starting to become meaningful engagements. This is where they might have subscribed to an email list. They could start following you on social media, for example. They've signed up for a webinar. They might even have signed up for a free trial if you're offering software as a subscription, etc. And then the final phase in this model is the bottom of the funnel, which is where prospective customers go before they convert. So at this point, you are primed to convert them. You've got their attention, you've built some trust in them, you've fostered a relationship with them, and you are now going to convert them. So it's really just a condensation of the 6 other steps of the larger funnel that we've talked about. You may also have seen the AIDA model, which is attention, interest, desire, action. So again, just a foreshortened version of the larger funnel. Very similar process though. They're interested because you have their attention, then they have a desire to purchase, and finally you make it possible for them to purchase by giving them a means to act. Now, the non-linear marketing funnel then takes this entire process to another stage. And if you cast your mind back to the beginning of today's session where we talked about Mr. Dewey, and Mr. Dewey had that final post-sale evaluation stage, this is essentially what the inverted non-linear marketing funnel is. So you go through the 6 normal stages that lead to purchase, but this is where you now start making sure that that one-off purchase becomes a repeat customer. And that's where you start looking at the next stages. So once they've purchased, they move through adoption, retention, expansion, and ideally advocacy. If you've got a customer that starts spruiking on your behalf, you have absolutely won the lotto, because word of mouth is an incredibly powerful sales tool, and it's one that you really cannot generate yourself. You can try to get people to speak on your behalf, but ultimately it's their decision as to whether they will or won't do. So the cone-shaped marketing funnel been the default for many decades, but we have evolved into the next stage. And the reality is the world of social media has made that next stage even more important. Many businesses started to leave behind the traditional cone in favor of the bow tie or the hourglass that I've just shown you. And that, of course, is fostering that post-purchase behavior. In this model, you really want to create strong relationships with your customers so that not only don't they leave you to buy from your competitor, but they become repeat buyers and they become advocates of your brand. This is where we start engaging user groups, for example, and we don't tend to call them that in any way other than the tech world, but it is a very similar concept. So this is where, for example, you have customers who get together to have social media groups, and on those social media groups, they talk about their purchases, they talk about how they go about wearing certain garments, for example, tips and tricks. They might share photographs so that they can share how sizing works in garments, etc. And of course, in the manufacturing sector or the non-commercial sector, this is where they are sharing some of those experiences of how the product has improved their safety records, etc. Very important component if you want to see how your customers can start talking on your behalf. And yes, Michelle, we will be sharing the deck of today's session. And as always, the webinar recording will also be shared, but that will be done at the end of the program, and it will be done directly by Global Victoria. So the non-linear marketing funnel, very important in today's world, particularly where people are engaging online and where they could be saying bad things about your company. You want to make sure that they say good things about your company and they do it as quickly as possible, but they continue to do it. Now, I want to pause for a moment on the difference between B2B and B2C marketing funnels, because they do differ a little bit in the way in which people interact within that funnel. So first of all, when we start looking at customer purchasing decisions, there are some distinct differences between B2B and B2C. In the case of B2B, we're mostly relying on rational buying behavior. Here, things are very rarely done on a knee-jerk basis. When businesses are purchasing products and services, they are weighing up the options and they eventually make a calculated decision. Whereas B2B marketing absolutely focuses on on purchasing decisions that are influenced by emotions. This thing makes you feel good, look good, gets you friends, etc., etc. B2B marketers will describe the product's features, how they will benefit the target market. The final decision is made on logic, and the final decision is made on how a solution is presented to a problem. B2B customers have problems. You, as the marketers to those people, have solutions to those problems. And that problem could be as simple as needing a specific product to expand a product range. It could be plugging a gap in a supply chain. It could be a service that the business needs because the business is growing. So they might need an HR service, for example, that they didn't before. B2C marketers, on the other hand, try to evoke emotions. And they very often, in very simple language, focus on how the buyer will feel after they have made the purchase. And it generally focuses on them feeling good. So if we look at that in the graphic representation, we can see that in the case of B2B customers, you will build a relationship with your target audience. You'll share expertise with them because they're more rationally driven. You'll focus on a niche market. You're not likely to give them a whole raft of products to choose from. You're going to focus in on the ones they specifically need to satisfy what they have determined rationally. There's a much longer selling cycle. Businesses don't easily make decisions immediately. There's a longer selling cycle. It takes them longer to reach decisions because there's more consultation involved. And very often there's also more negotiation on the price. It involves more people, and these people are both the decision makers, but also the influencers of those decision makers. Here, your goal is about building trust and credibility through the content that you put in the hands of your prospective customers. In the case of B2C, It's about building brand awareness across a broad market, then focusing on triggering emotions and wanting those quick purchase decisions being made. This is where somebody buys that caftan, for example, because they have been convinced that it's a limited edition. There are only a handful of these. If they don't buy it today, they're never going to see it again. So they purchase it. They might have buyer's remorse after the fact, but that's a conversation for another day. These focus on large scale markets. And of course, there's a much shorter selling cycle. Individuals make buying decisions fairly quickly. And once they've made that buying decision, they buy. Generally, B2C involves individuals, or there could be families. So if what you're selling, for example, is a tourism service, chances are the whole family is going to get involved as to where they want to go on holiday and whether they want to go by aeroplane or by ship or indeed take a road trip. Your main goal here is to create that impulse and the urge to buy, and you do that through your branding and your messaging. And as I mentioned, we're going to be drilling down a lot further into that branding piece next week. So the main difference between the B2B and the B2C marketing funnel is the number of people involved in the process, and then the level of interaction between businesses and consumers. B2C consumers generally navigate through the funnel alone with little or no direction and interaction with the business. So whether it's done online or it's done in a retail setting or it's done in some other setting, the consumer generally walks through the store, virtual or real, by themselves. They look at things, they pick them up, they smell them, they touch them, they go to a cash register or an online checkout and they buy them. Very few customers actually interact with a representative of the business, and that is generally if there's a problem. B2B consumers usually include more than 5 people from all sorts of different departments. The top of the funnel looks very similar. It's at the lower stages that there's then that more direct contact, and that's where the funnel starts to look different. So if we compare the funnel, you can see that it starts with search for information on both sides. Then the B2C customer learns about the products. The B2B customer examines specific products. They will go to the review stage. They will speak to others about the product, etc. And as we move through that funnel, we see that things change even more substantially, so that by the time we get to intent, we've got the B2C customer putting it in a cart, whereas the B2B customer is asking for a product demonstration, for example, or they might want a sample of a product. The evaluation phase, again, the review, the customer, the B2B customer is going to review the shopping cart and they're going to go through the checkout, and that's pretty much done. Whereas this is where the proposal phase starts for the B2B customer. And then, of course, the proposal is going to be considered and the negotiation phase could commence. And eventually the purchase happens, and it happens at the same stage, but it takes longer to reach this stage in the B2B customer. So let's look at measuring success. And I'm probably a bit of a broken record when it comes to measuring success, but it is vitally important that you do measure so that you know whether or not any of your marketing activities have actually worked. So there's some key marketing funnel metrics that you should measure. There's the cost per acquisition, the CPA. CPA measures how much you're spending on your marketing to acquire each new customer. And here we're generally going to be looking at ways in which you analyze the effectiveness of your paid advertising, your email marketing, your social media, and other paid marketing efforts. So to get this number, you divide the entire cost of your marketing campaign by the number of conversions. And from there, the idea is really quite simple. If the cost outweighs the gain, you probably want to rethink that particular campaign. If, however, you are actually showing a return on that investment, then that's probably a way for you to consider going in future. The customer lifetime value is also an important one, because the customer lifetime value measures the continuous value that a customer brings to your company. So this metric is all about retention. And as we know, it is actually a lot easier to gain a new customer than it is to keep a customer. But the customer that you keep is a lot more valuable in the long run. And if we think of that non-linear funnel, we can see the value there. A couple of other metrics: conversion rates. Conversion rate measures the frequency of conversions. So some marketers only focus on sales, but of course there are other metrics that are just as important across the entire funnel. So if we look at the top of the funnel, we're looking at things like how many visitors convert to qualified leads. Because if someone doesn't convert into a qualified lead, they're of no use to you. As soon as they've converted to a qualified lead, you can start marketing to them so they have value, even if they might not get to the sales part. In the middle of the funnel conversion is how many of those qualified leads then convert to become signups or subscribers. So how many of them have chosen to engage with you on a more permanent basis? And then finally, the bottom of the funnel conversion, how many of those qualified leads that became subscribers have now turned into customers by making a purchase. Measuring goal conversion allows you to make more informed decisions about every funnel stage. If you're not measuring throughout the funnel, you know how many you started with right at the top, you know how many sales you got, but you don't know at which point they dropped off. And that's very, very important for you to analyze. And then there's conversion rate per channel. So every single channel has different goals. You have to analyze the success of each one. And remember, we've talked at some length about having objectives that you can measure. This is where you start doing that measuring component. So just as that goal conversion, if you've got clear definitions for each channel, you will have a much better idea of how that has worked. So you need to ask yourself, is clicking on a paid ad a conversion? Just clicking in itself is probably not enough. But of course, if they haven't clicked, they can't go any further. Is responding to an email a conversion? So if somebody has received your email and they've replied to that email to say, thank you for sending this to me, does that count as a conversion? Or do you expect more than just acknowledgement? The mere fact that they've received it and it hasn't bounced, is that enough for you? Do you, for example, consider signing up for a newsletter a conversion? And you might, because that might have been one of your primary goals in running a particular campaign. But if just signing up for a newsletter for you is not conversion, what is conversion and how do you measure that? Now, there are lots and lots of tools that you can use to measure conversion and tools that you can use to increase conversions. I'm just going to pause on a couple of tools today, and this hopefully gives you an idea of the sorts of things that you can be looking at. The first point is that qualitative data is just as important as quantitative data when it comes to measuring conversion and converting or not converting. So you need to know more than just hard numbers. You also need some sort of qualitative measure. One of the ways in which you can measure this, particularly as it relates to your website, is the use of the heat map. So heat maps show popular and unpopular areas of your page, and that is measured through where somebody clicks, where they rest on a page, etc. And this also then reveals how people move on and how they interact with your site in an aggregated term. Analyzing heat maps helps you to identify those elements that are and those elements that aren't working to get people moving through your funnel. So once they've landed on your website, of course, the awareness level has already been met. Now you need to see how they interact with your website and how that then spurs them to move through the funnel. You can do this through numbers and percentages that your Google Analytics will show you, for example, but a heat map really makes it a lot clearer. And once you have some insight into how these people are behaving on the pages of your site, you can then affect changes where and when you have to. That means you might dispense with something that is not being looked at all, and you might concentrate more on something that is. It also gives you an opportunity to run some A/B testing to see what works and what doesn't work. And the final thing that I'd like to touch on, and as I mentioned, there are many different ways, but this is the other one that I want to touch on today, is getting feedback from real users with on-site surveys. It's one of the fastest, one of the easiest ways to get direct feedback from visitors to your website. And that's really simple. You can have a little pop-up. How would you rate your overall experience on our site today or with our business today? Awful and amazing, and various other things in between. This engages your visitors with every step of the funnel so that you can improve your customer journey and indeed your customer experience and the user experience of your website throughout. And that brings us to the end of today's session. As I mentioned, if you've got any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll take them, bearing in mind that next week we are going to look in a lot more detail at the various activities you use to underpin all the stages of the marketing funnel and how you actually go about building a brand. And once you've built that brand, how you then retain the customers in that brand. Someone has a question about bad Google reviews. What can be done about them? Should we respond? Yes, you should respond. You can't just leave a bad review out there, but how you respond depends on what the bad review was. So if the bad review, for example, was about customer service, and your customer service sucked and that's all they say, it's difficult to come back with a considered answer if you don't know what it was. But you certainly can respond, and you should respond. And it's always taking a step that says, you, the customer, are always right. We will find a way to work around the problem that you have experienced. If, of course, they've gone into a great deal of detail about a specific product, about how it failed, how it was dangerous, etc., you then have to respond to every one of the arguments. It's very important to not come across as defensive here. It's also very important to not make the customer seem like the bad one in this relationship. You don't necessarily accept blame for something that could lead you to a liability suit, for example, but you do accept responsibility. You accept responsibility by acknowledging that there was a problem and by reaching out to offer a solution to the problem. You don't have to offer the solution in public, but you can offer a solution to that particular customer by saying, please contact us directly through Messenger, for example, if they've done it on Facebook, so that we can then address your concerns one-on-one. But that fact that you've stepped into the equation and you've offered a solution does need to be in public. I hope that offers you. In the B2B context, same sort of thing. You have to acknowledge the fact that there is a review and the review is not positive, and then you have to offer ways to help solve the problem. And it's all about, there's clearly a problem that has arisen. We apologize if you've seen it as such. What can we do to help fix this problem? And let us take this conversation offline so that we can solve it for you. And very important that you do take it offline, because you don't want to enter into a slagging match online. Having a workshop specifically on that, not part of this series. It's not one of those that we've anticipated including here, but certainly something that I will take on board, and maybe we can do some role play around that as well and see how you overcome some of those issues and how you turn the negatives into positives. There's also, of course, the scenario that arises where somebody has posted a negative review without actually having been a customer. And that could be a competitor who's trying to subvert what you are doing, etc. And there are ways of checking whether that is an actual review. If it's a B2B review, chances are you already know who that customer is, so you know whether it's real or not. If it turns out to be something that is absolutely fake, again, there are ways to handle that without saying this is a fake review, it's rubbish, don't take any count of it, because people will assume that you're lying. So, they're always going to take the side of the customer. Of course, if you're in a position where you've got a really good relationship with your customers, very often your customers will step in and help to answer that question or help to deflect from the negative review and turn it into a positive. But point taken, maybe we should look at a way of dealing with negative reviews or indeed positive reviews on social media. How do you deal with those? How do you step in, and when do you step in, and when do you just take the glory that goes with it? I don't think we've got any other questions for today. So all that remains is to draw your attention again to the Export Skills Program link on your screen, where you go to book all the other sessions still to come, not just in the marketing module, but in all the other modules still to come. And as you know, there are 5 of them. And module number 5, which we haven't yet started, kicks off on the 30th of May. So business rules starting then. If you do have any questions, or if you're not sure whether something is relevant to you, for example, if you've looked at the schedule, feel free to drop me an email. I'm always more than happy to have that conversation one-on-one through email with you. So all that remains today is to say thank you very much for your attention. As always, it's been a pleasure having your company, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session. And go off and do some really good business. Thanks all. Goodbye.